On this week's episode of Word on the Snakevine.
So, one of the weirdest snakebite incidences that I've dealt with was about 2 years ago. And what happened was, it was a couple visiting from Germany. They were on holiday or somewhere at a lodge. And pretty much what happened was, as the guy sat down on the toilet in the middle of the night, we had a lovely big Western Barred spitting cobra bite the gentleman on his testicles. So unfortunately what happened, he got a really bad dose of venom. Unfortunately they couldn't save it, and as far as I know, what happened was he lost both of his testicles and a bit of his penis due to the severe necrosis. That same year there was another incident like that as well. So we had two incidences of people that were bitten on their testicles while sitting down on a toilet. So what happens in a lot of these farms typically is, they can come through the drainage system and end up in the toilet. So unfortunately, accidents do happen. It's certainly one of the worst ones I've seen. From a male's perspective, obviously it hurts us as well. So, but fortunately, both of them are doing well, and they did survive the ordeal. I'm not so sure about the mental scarring afterwards.
That's I don't think either of them have got words to describe that. Ouch.
I'll rethink my your offer of visiting Namibia.
So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Word on the Snakevine.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Word on the Snakevine. I'm your host Ross Deacon, and in this podcast we talk all about things venomous animal related, from venom research, venomous animal husbandry, animal conservation, herping, and of course snakebite and snakebite initiatives from all around this world. On this episode, I've joining me as my co-host.
Hi, I'm Ed, and before we start I have to do a few formalities. Any views expressed in this episode are the views of the guests and the host, not the facilities or company they work for.
And today we have a new host joining us. We have Danny Stiene on the line. How are you, Danny?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you very much. So Danny is joining us as part of our new host lineup. You will see that Danny and Squirrel are joining myself and Ed to create a little bit more of a diverse background, a little bit more of a breadth of knowledge across different species and across different genres, and across, obviously, from a different academic background with Squirrel and a different hobbyist background with Danny, to try and mix it up a little bit. So this is Danny's first episode, and today we have Francois Theart joining us. How are you, Francois?
Oh, very good. Namibia is freezing, but otherwise everything's peachy over here.
That's the total opposite to what it's like in Europe right now. Even in the UK, 33 degrees, and I'm melting. I can hear my ducks in the background also melting. It's thank you so much for joining us today. I don't dare to think of what time in the night it is down there. Actually, no, you're not too bad, are you? So you're probably about 8:30, 7:30, 8:30?
Correct.
Yeah.
No, same time.
Same time, yeah.
Same time as me.
Yeah, I'm just a walking clock. It's one of my many talents. So thank you very much for joining us. It means a lot when we can get people that are so respected, such as yourself, on the podcast. So I think to start off, how did you get into reptiles and snakes, and how did you get involved in the research aspect of that also?
Oh, well, I suppose, like anyone growing up in Africa, you can't really run away from the fact that reptiles are everywhere. Now, what's quite strange about my situation is my family are not really snake fans or anything. So I used to grow up with the old tradition, the only good snake is a dead snake. But one thing that really got me into this is from a very young age, I saw a lot of people killing snakes. And, I realized that we can't continue to do this, especially not in a country with, like Namibia, that has a fairly rich diversity of reptiles. And pretty much from that point on in, I started to study snakes. I had my field guide, and basically from that point on in, everything just started. And I used to sit down while I was supposed to study for math. I used to sit down and study my snake book and try to identify everything. And one day at school, there was a snake on the playground, and everyone at that time knew I was mad about snakes, and they called me and I caught it, and that just really ignited my passion. And that's when I basically started to educate the kids about snakes as well in my school, and everyone, whenever there was an animal on the playground, they used to call me, and I would go out and I would remove it. But
Can
back
I just
to the
rewind you back and just ask what that snake was that you removed?
It was actually an egg eater, so something harmless.
That's the cultist.
Well, they're still my favorite snakes, obviously, because of for that reason. But when I started to realize that there is this issue of killing snakes, I started to put my name out there and tell people that if you see a snake, you can phone me. At the time, I didn't have a driver's license, so my parents just had to bite the bullet and drive me around and allow me to catch snakes. Obviously, the non-venomous stuff was what I was allowed to catch. And at the age of 16, I started to move on to the venomous stuff.
Sorry guys, the missus comes home and my dog lets me know that.
It's okay, don't worry. So, when you say you were catching non-venomous snakes, was there really you were catching and removing venomous snakes, but telling your parents that they were non-venomous?
At times, yes. At times, I used to phone some of my friends with driver's license to take me around. And growing up here, I didn't have the privilege of having a mentor. So everything that I know about handling snakes is completely self-taught. So basically what I did in order to train myself is I used to get the biggest, angriest mole snake and play around with my hook stick and see how many times I got bitten. And if I knew I made a mistake, I would change my handling. But that's some of the challenges that I faced as well, is that I never really had a mentor and someone in order to show me how to do stuff properly. So most of the stuff that I learned was just purely trial and error, if you will. So as bad as it sounds.
But to be fair, a mole snake, I wouldn't want to be bitten by a mole snake. They can inflict some serious injuries.
Exactly. And that's why I decided to choose it, because I knew if I made a mistake, it's going to hurt, and I'm probably going to need stitches when it bites me.
I still beats and beaters though.
Yeah, it's that's definitely a snake to teach yourself to handle with. Actually, I'm actually quite surprised, because obviously you've got quite a diverse herpafauna in Namibia, and as you say, I'm surprised you weren't encountering more venomous snakes than non-venomous. That may be just from my twisted, I like venomous snake view, if that makes sense.
Well,
so
if it comes down to that, I suppose at the time there was a small group of people that knew what I was doing. So the data of non-venomous versus venomous would have been biased to a certain degree. But certainly something that's quite interesting, when I started my initial research project on human-snake conflict, venomous snakes far outweigh non-venomous snakes in conflict situations. So there's more venomous in the city around people than non-venomous, actually.
And that's quite a scary thought if you think about it. A high number of venomous snakes in the city boundaries. That's
Are they more prone to adapt, or what's the reason for that?
Well, this was the reason we started the study. We tried to figure out why snakes are coming to the city. Now, Windhoek, which is the capital, is not a very big city. We have a population of approximately 400,000 people here. And most of the city has green spaces. So it's either up against the mountain, or there's rivers flowing through some of the suburbs, and it's fairly easy for the animals, to navigate through this, which is what I think is one of the reasons why we're seeing so many snakes. And with this project, what we actually did was every single snake that we removed, we recorded. So it was GPS coordinates, we took air temperature, ground temperature, we looked at variables like air pressure and humidity to see whether any of this influences snake movements. And what we also did is we actually looked at the prey found in the different suburbs. So we actually set up some Sherman traps and sent out a questionnaire to ask whether people feed birds or not, to see whether that has any impact on it as well. So what we did find with this project, what was quite interesting, was that snakes actually move quite a bit with rainfall. So a couple of what you'll see, and the trend that we saw typically, was that about a week before it rains, we'll have an explosion of snakes, and then all of a sudden you'll remove 50 snakes, in a period of 2 weeks. And then after it rains, it's quiet, and then just before it rains, it spikes again. So we saw that there's definitely some variables with rainfall as well as with air pressure. So it seems drop in air pressure and rainfall are two of the biggest influences, and temperature would be the biggest influences of our snake movements here.
And that's quite interesting. That's really quite interesting, because that's in Europe. I know that's one of the ways that we use to breed certain species of snake, is using the natural pressure peaks and swells and troughs of before rain cycles, which is quite interesting to hear you say that they'd actually move in those periods of time, obviously searching for food, which is quite interesting. So you've kind of started to touch on the snake bite, the snake human conflict in Namibia. So do you have quite a serious problem with that in Namibia? Because obviously it's quite a large country which is very sparsely populated, isn't it, really?
Yeah, so that's one of the issues we have is we have quite a lot of snake bites, and this year it was incredibly bad. I dealt with, along with the 2 snakebite doctors I work with, we had about 100 bites, and these are just cases that we know about. I reckon if we look at the bigger picture, it's difficult for me to say how many people get bitten because we don't have data, no one records this stuff. So all of the bites, the information we have are just from patients that we've worked with ourselves. So if we go into that, I think, there is a massive issue with snake bites in Namibia. And more specifically, there's an issue with one particular species that bites more people than any other snake, and that would be the western barred spitting cobra, or zebra spitting cobra. This snake is just proving to be such an issue for us at the moment. And, besides that, the current antivenom from South Africa is not really effective against the bite. So there's some issues with that.
And that's actually deemed as quite an effective antivenom in academic circles. It's seen as one of the better antivenoms out there currently as well. So it's quite interesting. So do you know the reason why it's not very effective? Is it just a venom difference due to locality and prey item, or?
Well, I would think so. And one of the biggest issues with the SAVP, or with the SIMA antivenom, is the fact that Nigricinta was never included in the current polyvalent. And if we're looking at some of the systemic stuff that we're seeing in Nigricinta bites, like intravascular hemolysis, which is a bit of a bleeding tendency, and we have something like rhabdomyolysis, which is acute kidney damage, which this snake causes, and it is quite rapid, especially in young children. Now, as far as I know, there was a paper published by Brian Fry, I think somewhere earlier this year, where they looked at that bleeding tendency, and where they found that the antivenom actually does not neutralize it, doesn't touch it at all. So that's one of the big issues that we also have at the moment.
And then, obviously, with the sparseness of the country, getting this antivenom that is not very effective in the first place around, or getting people to a hospital that can treat them, is probably of quite a big difficulty.
Correct. When we're looking at Namibia has a relatively good infrastructure, so I don't see a reason why we should have this issue with snakebite, because we have major hospitals in most of the regions throughout our country. But sometimes the big problem is a lot of the people stay in conservancies, vast areas of wilderness, which sometimes they're about 1,000 kilometers away from the nearest hospital. And they only have these clinics and stuff in between. But once again, we don't really know the extent of this issue. It's just a big challenge for us in terms of looking at logistics and where most of the bites occur. If we have that information, we can address the issue. And the cool thing about Namibia as well is, and as far as my knowledge goes, is that anti-venom or any healthcare in Namibia, in the government sector, so government patients, they just pay like $50 Namibian for the treatment they received. So they don't have those massive bills that we see in other parts of the world at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's very lucky, because a lot of these countries, the money is a serious part of the reason why people don't get treated, is purely because they can't afford to, or they think they can't afford to, where in reality, if you've got that system that works for you, that's quite good. So I think we're quite lucky in the European countries that we live in, is that we don't pay for health. Well, we pay for healthcare through our tax on our earnings, rather than paying for the bills and the healthcare that we actually use. So we're quite lucky, and I think we forget that in Europe quite considerably a lot of the time, that we don't have these massive bills and such forth coming towards us, which is good for us, really. It's good for us. So how did you get involved in looking at the human snakebite conflict? How did that come about? Was it purely just from when you were growing up, seeing these people killing them, or did something else trigger the piece of work that you've done there?
Well, interesting question. So, when I started to finish my school career, I started to question why these snakes are coming to the city, and is there no reason I can do any work on this? Are there specific stuff that I can look at? And that's when I met my supervisor at the university, Dr. Morgan Hauptfleisch, who's an ecologist. And he actually gave me the bright idea of recording everything, and this is how we got into it. So we've been doing this project now since 2015, and it was finished last year. So it's 3 years worth of data on 500 snakes and 16 different species, as far as I know. So I would say it is the most complete data set on snake conflict anywhere. That's what I would think. So.
Well, that's one of the problems that a lot of countries have, is the data is just not realistic. They're not very good at recording the data. So to hear you come out and say you think that you've tried your hardest to do that, and you think that you've got quite a good data set and information around you and around the issue that you have in Namibia, that's great. I think it's half of the battle is knowing the problem in the first place, and if you've got that, if you know exactly what the battle is, which you've got, I think you're on. It feels like you've definitely got some direction to go to help with the conflict and help.
I know from following Foss on social media that funding is an issue. He seems to struggle to get the funding for the research he's doing and the things he needs to.
So can you talk a little bit more about that then, Francois, about the funding, the issues with the funding you get? Is that from a governmental point of view, or is that from just that it's not seen within academic circles within Namibia, that it's not worth the funding, or is it a wider world issue as regards to you've just not got funding coming into Namibia from other projects or other initiatives that are going on?
Well, it's a bit of both, I suppose. Our government is broke at the moment, so they don't have any money whatsoever, as is my university. And we've applied for some grants locally, and they've just been turned down every single time. I've applied for a grant with the American Embassy as well. I'm just waiting on confirmation whether I got it or not. But the projects, or the snake conflict project that I've been doing, was basically out of my own pocket. And we remove snakes free of charge. We don't ask a fee. So every single cent that I've gotten in has basically just been pushed back into this project to make sure it happens. How we got our money initially is just by doing public awareness talks or selling snake posters. That's about as good as the funding got. But apart from all of this nonsense of funding, I don't think that it really will influence me. Whether I get funding or not, I'll just continue to do what I do, and I would use my own personal funds happily in order to make a difference where I can. To me, it's about the people of Namibia, and it's about saving my snakes. So whether I bankrupt myself at the end of the day doesn't bother me too much.
Well, it's funny you say that. There's this dedication that you've got, and that we see that is I'll spit my words out, which is evident in what you're saying, and then this dedication is such a common thing across people who work within snakebite or within venom research and stuff. That it's never about making the money; it's about making the difference. And a lot of these people, like yourself, don't make money from it at all. In fact, it costs you a lot of money. It costs a lot of other people a lot of money. But it's about, as you say, saving snakes or saving human lives, which inevitably will save snakes in the long run, because it changes people's perceptions. So it's incredible that a lot. You're not just the only person in that position, and that's one of the reasons why we started this podcast. Is we wanted to give people like yourself that platform to kind of say, like, look, I'm here. This is the work I'm doing. This is how it's helping people. But we need help of some sort, and if anything can come of that, hopefully people will hear. Somebody will hear this, or it may open some doors. We know it has for somebody in India, for the lady in Indonesia. She's getting some help from a couple of outside sources on buying some anti-venom in and getting some anti-venom stores built up, which is great.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and this is something I really appreciate. I mean, when Danny initially approached me about it, I was just like, I really want to do this, because quite funny was the day before he contacted me, I was actually listening to some of your podcasts as well. It's just like, hey, this is a good platform. Maybe I should try and get on there at some point in time. And literally 24 hours later, the message pops up.
Nice.
But this is unfortunately the reality for most of us working in this field, and especially if you're looking at developing countries. It's always tough to get the funding, and most people would rather prefer funding charismatic megafauna. I mean, if I look at the amount of money that's going into rhinos or elephants or lions, all of that stuff is relevant. Yes.
Yeah, the big old panda problem.
Now, all of that stuff is relevant, and we have other issues with human-wildlife conflict in Namibia. But, with snake bites, unfortunately, there's an added human element. So people are dying, they're losing limbs. And, this is stuff that shouldn't be happening in modern-day Namibia, and unfortunately it is. So if we can convince some of the guys that they can just move their funds away a bit from charismatic megafauna and fund us, then certainly we can make a difference. That's a big thing.
I think the position of the WHO and the work that you were involved in as well with getting snakebite recognised as a neglected tropical disease, I think that's going to help a lot of people from everything I understand and from people we've spoken to and stuff, and hopefully some future episodes coming up that we understand is that more and more people are shifting a focus to it, because it's now been recognised by the WHO as saying, hang on a minute, we're losing 150,000 people a year worldwide to this.
Yeah.
This one thing that is actually preventable. A lot of it is preventable from behavioural changes, from education, as well as getting better medical medical facilities and and treatment solutions. However, that does include funding, and that does include countries like Namibia where you have this conflict. So hopefully that will help you guys at some point down the line. Something will come of that for you.
Yeah, we were quite fortunate to have a minister of health that was a massive snakebite activist. And we, as a small little country in the southwest corner of Africa, also played a role in getting that legislation passed. And I remember sitting, when was it? Was it 2015 or 2016, somewhere during that time? And we were actually writing a letter for the Minister of Health to present this at the WHO meeting. So we had that, and unfortunately, as politics go, he was sacked, and we've lost a custodian of snakebite in Namibia through that, unfortunately. Last year, I was fortunate enough to get invited to Parliament, and we screened. I don't know, you guys probably know the documentary Minutes to Die.
Yeah.
And we screened Minutes to Die to all of the members, including some fairly high-ranked officials. And what happened was that they agreed that a new legislation needs to be passed to make snakebite a notifiable disease. But unfortunately, because our Minister of Health was sacked, there's no one driving that at this point in time. So that entire project just basically collapsed, which is fairly disappointing, given that we put a hell of a lot of work in that. So this is unfortunately the reality we also face, is that you don't only have funding issues, but you also have issues with politics and all that in government.
Yeah, definitely. So what are the numbers like in Namibia? So what are your bite ratio numbers?
Well, difficult question to answer. Unfortunately, we don't have the data on that in order to say, hey, it's X amount of people.
Yeah.
There were some guys from a local university that tried to publish a paper, but man, there was some dodgy data in that. Basically looked like they just copied something from the WHO and pasted it and said, hey, these are the numbers of people that get bitten. If I have to estimate the amount of people that get bitten throughout Namibia every year, I would put it between 100 and 200 people. And that would be cases that get to hospital. Cases that people die, in a rural setting, I can't say. So it's always a difficult question for me to answer because I don't have the data, and I don't like making statements without having that stuff in front of me. But we will start with data collection quite soon, and hopefully, hopefully I can report back to you and give you the exact number of people that get bitten every year.
Yeah, that would be great. So at the minute, with obviously the drop in temperature in Namibia, are you on a brumation cycle right now? So from a animal rescue point of view, you're probably quite slow.
Yes, so it's not been awfully busy the last couple of days with this cold front that has moved in. But we have caught some snakes during winter. I think there were 3 call-outs that we had, and we had 2 snake bites as well. But this time of the year, usually it's quiet. I'm waiting for August, and then it's just going to start picking up again, and then I am not going to sleep. It's a bit hectic.
That's probably not the nicest position to be in. So, so you were mentioning earlier that it's kind of related to the cold front. Actually, you were saying earlier before we started recording about Namibia is in the biggest drought in 100 years.
Yes, so we have a very, very severe drought. It's actually quite bad at the moment. There's no grazing for cattle or for wildlife, so everyone's suffering. My thoughts go out to our local farmers that have been struggling so hard. So one thing that I've seen personally with this drought is that there was a drop in snake removals as well, compared to years where we had relatively good rain. We had the lowest amount of call-outs that I can remember. And another thing that I noticed is that we got quite a lot of dead snakes, and not only that, on some call-outs we got snakes that were starved and dehydrated, and unfortunately they were beyond the point of saving. So the most ethical thing for me, and while most people won't agree with it, was to euthanize them and to donate them to the museum.
So you say that you euthanize them. What is the veterinary care like for reptiles out in Namibia? Because obviously, in the UK, for instance, reptiles, especially venomous reptiles, we struggle for veterinary care.
Over here, I got like 2 or 3 doctors that will treat venomous animals, and that's it.
Sure, yeah. So we're not that fortunate over here, and I think one of the biggest reasons for that, would be just specifically because the reptile trade in our country is illegal. So you're not allowed to keep snakes, whether it's exotic or local stuff. So a lot of our vets are not specialized in that. I have one team of veterinary scientists or vets that I tend to work with that have been doing a fantastic job and that do help me. I've managed to get them to the point where they are willing to help, as long as I just restrain and handle the dangerous stuff.
Yeah.
But other than that, there's no vet in this country that knows how to deal with snakes apart from my small team. And wherever I go, I try to educate the vets as well. My team of vets, most of the stuff, that they learned about snake behavior, I've taught them, and then vice versa. But obviously, with the challenge that we have, specifically, I also need to have some info on some of the diseases, and I've been doing a lot of reading on that topic as well. So I'm relatively well informed on some of the issues that snakes can face, and I double check with my vets always to see whether that is the case. Unfortunately, with snakes and drought, there's not much you can do. And if your permits don't cover the fact that you can rehabilitate snakes, then you're not allowed to do so. I can, but it's sometimes I just feel it's more ethical to euthanize animals, because if you keep them over a certain amount of time in captivity, again, I don't know whether that animal is going to be exposed to pathogens or whatever the case may be, and we're trying to avoid the spread of disease here as well.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So you were saying that the pet trade is illegal in Namibia. So is that always been the case, or is it because of something? Do you have an illegal pet trade there because of it?
Well, it's always been the case. I think the original legislation was pushed through somewhere in the 80s, and at the time it was an American herpetologist that was working here. It was his name was Mike Griffin, and I think he was the biggest influence to push that legislation through that stopped people from keeping snakes. The thing is, as with everything else in the world, if you're going to make it illegal, it's going to go underground. And I can tell you some stories of some of the stuff that we've caught here. I mean, Dimrell's boas, red-tailed boas, western diamondback rattlesnakes, green iguanas. So people don't really care about these legislations, and there's no regulation from the Ministry of Environment and Tourism as well. So they don't have control over it, and they don't have the manpower even to manage it, nor the knowledge on reptiles. So it's not going to stop, unfortunately.
I assume these animals come in from other neighbouring countries that do have a pet trade, such as obviously South Africa and such forth.
Yeah.
With you being joined by road, it's quite easy for somebody to just drive through effectively with these animals if they want them.
Exactly, and I mean the easiest thing that they do is they take the snake, they chuck it in an ice cream tub, and they shove it underneath their seat, and they just drive through. No problems, no issues. And even if people catch them, I mean, the first thing that's going to happen if you open that tub and there's a snake in it and the official sees it, probably he's going to run away, because most of our officials either police or nature conservation don't have the know-how how to handle snakes, which is also a big issue. And they, we've tried to educate them quite a few times, but again, there's no willingness from them. And this year, especially, we also had issues where they tried to block a bunch of the snake handlers from catching snakes. So there were some problems there as well.
How did they do that? How did they block snakes? Do you have to have a license to be a snake catcher then?
Well, there's basically no permit in place, for removing snakes. So the only way of getting a permit is you need a research permit. And that is what I have, which allows me to remove snakes and, obviously to conduct my work. So I have a couple of my guys that assist me in and around the city listed on the permit. But for some strange reason, the guys from the ministry got a knee-jerk reaction. And they just said that, now every time you remove a snake, you need to inform us that you're doing so, just so we make sure you're not smuggling this stuff. So it got to the point where it got so bad, if you get a call out, you first need to phone nature conservation and they can give you the green light whether to go or not. And a bunch of the guys basically felt that they were being blocked, that they can't do what they do. And at that point in time, everyone just stopped. So, they really cracked down on some of the snake handlers in the city, which I felt was a bit unfair, but, it is what it is. It's their rules, so we just need to fall in with it.
That's quite a shame that they did that, though, because obviously that snake could then potentially lead on to a bite situation where it's effectively going to cost the government a lot more money and such forth to treat somebody and to save somebody, when it could have been, that issue could have been solved quite quickly and quite easily by not blocking this person to go and remove that snake from somebody's property.
Yeah, that was a good example of something that happened one evening. It was a spitting cobra in one of the informal settlements around the city, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was, they didn't want to respond to it, and we went out and we saw this family with 3 little children standing outside. When I went into the building initially, in order to scratch around, I've eventually found the spitting cobra right next to the bed where the kids were sleeping. So if I didn't respond that evening, or any of the other snake handlers for that matter, who knows, we might have ended up with 2 children being bitten. But again, it's the challenge we have. We just need to work through it and try to get governments on our side.
That's a sobering thought, though. That's definitely a sobering thought when you think how lucky people are in, especially the Western world, where we will never wake up with a snake, or we shouldn't wake up with a venomous snake loose in our bedroom or our children's bedroom.
Imagine it.
We can't put it into. We can't imagine it, and I think that's half the issue. Is that some of the feedback we've had from the podcast is just like, I just can't believe that's what's happening. It's just like, well, just because we're from a position of we're just lucky, our geographical position doesn't put us in this situation where this happens to you all the time. So, I know you obviously you do a lot of removals and such forth. So have you had any issues with removals? Have you ever been bitten or anything like that from doing these removals?
Well, I've only been bitten once. Well, what a snake to be bitten by, I suppose. So 2016, I was bitten by a 2.5 meter black mamba on my hip. Yes, so
very big one.
The worst thing about this call out was everything that went wrong on this particular day. So when I responded, it was about 40 kilometers outside of the city, at our international airport. The snake was up in a tree busy smashing some birds. And initially when I got at the site, the snake was already agitated because it was chased around for 2 hours. And pretty much, it was up in palm trees, so I couldn't climb to get it out. I had to get a cherry picker, and the snake was harassed for another hour. So you can imagine this mamba is just fuming at this point in time. So the snake decides to bail. He just basically dropped out of the tree and tried to get away. Unfortunately, the direction he chose was towards the main terminal building. So you can imagine, we just had a massive international flight land. There were hundreds of tourists, and if this snake went in there, you can think to yourself what would have happened. So in any case, so there was no crowd control, and one of the members of the crowd came too close to the snake, and it decided to dart, and I had to make the split decision. Either I grab the snake or it goes into the building. And initially what I did with my tongs, I grabbed it too far back, and I gave the snake enough leverage just to turn around and to whack me. So it bit me on my hip. I put the snake into the container, secured it, and specifically from that point on in, I just sat down and phoned our snakebite doctor, who initially thought it was a joke. Said to him, that's a serious story. And then from that point on in, I went to hospital. Within 40 minutes, I actually got antivenom, about 8 vials of the stuff. But one thing that was really, really scary was just how rapid the symptoms hit you from a mamba bite. I mean, I was expecting a bit of time, just to prepare myself. But within a matter of 2 minutes, I just felt everything. I had tingling tongue and lips. I had muscle spasms, chest pains, nausea, vomiting. By the time I got to hospital, I actually had breathing difficulties as well. And one thing that always upsets me to a certain degree is when people try to tell, and I'm guilty with this as well, is when people do talks on snakebite and they say, oh, but it's important to keep the person calm. Now, I can guarantee you that with approximately 13 years of handling dangerous snakes, removing countless of mambas, at that point that I was bitten, I started to stress. The thought actually crossed my mind that, crap, I might die today. And if you just think about a layman getting bitten by a snake, it is going to be impossible to keep that person calm from the point where he's bitten in order to get him to a hospital. It's going to be very difficult. And trying to tell people how to react in a snake bite if they haven't been in that position themselves is a difficult thing to do. And that's one of the things that in all of my lectures that I usually give to nature conservation students or wherever the case may be, is that if you're going to tell someone to keep calm during a snake bite, good luck, because it's not going to work out the way you want it to.
Definitely not. And I think as much as the message is that you should keep calm to obviously stop your blood pressure raising, I think whoever you are, it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to, in that position, as you say, panic's going to set in, you think you're going to lose your life, even though if you've got you're in the right position, in the right location, and that the reality of it is that you should be in a good position to keep your life. It's just to get the correct treatment to be able to keep your life. But that's quite interesting. So how come they chased it around for 2 hours and didn't leave it to just slink off by itself and just monitor the position it went? Because it seems like that was it was an agitated snake. Now, was that an agitated? Could that have been saved by them allowing the animal to disappear off by itself?
Well, the big issue was the snake was right in front of the terminal building. So if it decided to drop out of the tree, panic. So what they tried to chase the snake away. I don't know how exactly they did it, whether they threw it with rocks to try and to get it to move or try to kill it. I just know that snake was pissed off by the time I got to it. It was gaping and it was trying to bite. So what I think what they tried to do was they tried to kill it, and usually the first thing that a lot of people do is they pick up rocks and they try to throw the snake. So possibly that was one of the reasons why it got to that point and it got so mad. But again, it's my fault that I got bitten. It's just purely human error. Unfortunately, it happens, and whenever, unfortunately, in our field, whether you're the most experienced snake handler ever or whether you're a novice, whatever the case may be, at some point in time you are going to get bitten. You just need to prepare yourself for that. I always say it's not if you get bitten, it's when you get bitten and where.
I've heard that many times before from lots of people. It's not if, it's when.
Exactly. So, and what's your situation going to be?
As you say, the best handlers and the most experienced handlers in the world have all either had envenomations or well, most of them have had envenomations on numerous occasions. And as you say, it's the position that you prepare yourself to be in, knowing if in your line of work, it's knowing the route to hospital, the route to treatment, how quickly that you can get help. If you're keeping them at home, it's having prepared bite protocols, making sure that the ambulance technicians know exactly, the people who have got to be first on the scene know exactly what they need to do to keep you alive until you can get to hospital at the point they can administer the antivenom or treat systematically, depending on the species. And I think, but when you're an everyday person walking down the street or it's in your house, you get bitten in your sleep, why would you be prepared for that? And I think that's one of the biggest things. So, do you have any educational programs going on that you try and help people prepare for these situations?
Well, we're trying. So far we've done a lot of talks at schools, and we're starting with the youth, and we're doing a lot of work in informal settlements as well, going out and talking to the people. And we're starting with a new project now for the conservancies. So these are the guys that are quite far into the bush and away from help, and we're going to try and educate them on basic snake safety, wearing boots, checking your bed at night before you go to sleep, closing holes in your house. All that stuff is what we usually try to cover. And with snake removals as well, that's like the best opportunity you have in order to educate people. So often when we've caught a snake, wherever it may be, and it's already in the bucket, then we start informing the people what to do when you encounter a snake, how to react, and the question obviously pops up that what do I do when I get bitten? Preferably, I just say that you don't waste time and you get to a hospital. That's just the best advice out there. And I mean, obviously, we know that tourniquets and shoelaces are the go-to thing over here. So we're trying to teach people, just leave it as it is and get to a hospital as soon as possible, and make sure you wear protective footwear, long trousers, the usual stuff. And in the couple of years that I've been doing this, I've probably educated well over 10,000 people, including a variety of doctors on snake identification and all that.
That's brilliant. That's really good. So as you were saying there with the uses of tourniquets and stuff, do you have issues with faith healers and such forth that you see in other countries in Africa? Do you still have similar issues there?
We're quite fortunate in that sense, is that most of the people here, their first instinct is to go to a hospital. So if they're close to a hospital, they will go to a hospital. They're not going to waste any time. And this includes some of the most rural communities we have. And this is where we're quite lucky as well. And in most cases, we're also able to identify the snake because either they took a picture of it or they killed it. It's not, we don't prefer them killing it. Obviously that increases the risk, but other than that, yeah. There are some issues with fake healers and all that. Every now and again it pops up, but it's not as big of an issue as it is, in other countries in Africa. So, Namibia's population is quite clued up as to where to go to get a snake bite treated.
And that's quite a big challenge in itself to get to that position. So you're in quite a lucky position, especially regarding African countries there.
Yeah.
I think that I should say that probably helps from being one of the more developed countries within Africa.
Exactly. I think we have the potential of becoming the first country that doesn't have to lose a life to snakebite or don't have to lose limbs to snakebite. Everything is in place, and I mean we have our own medical school in Namibia as well, so we can teach future doctors, which we've already started to do. We're going to universities to lecture doctors on treatment of snakebite. So there is no reason for people to die or to lose limbs in our country. We have a good infrastructure. We have hospitals everywhere, well, in most parts at least, and we have clinics in rural areas. It's just about how can we get this to stop? And without government's involvement and without the private sector, unfortunately, it won't be able to stop. And we're a small, dedicated team of people that are doing this. When it comes to snakebite, I have there's 2 doctors that I work with. Dr. Christo Base is obviously the other one, and then he is obviously the main doctor here that deals with snakebite, and he has his apprentice that also tends to help out. And we're quite fortunate. And I mean, this man is clued up. He's been working with snakebites for over 43 years. So he's the most experienced snakebite doctor we have.
That's pretty impressive feat in itself to be working with it in 43 years. But it's great that you've got somebody in your corner like that, though, that can really help you, because a lot of other countries don't have that or don't have that yet. I think that's one of, as you say, is probably one of the quickest and easiest ways to combat this is, as you say, training of doctors and medical staff. And if you've got that possibility to put that infrastructure in with the younger doctors, I think that's brilliant. That's really good. So
yeah.
So something that Danny has mentioned before in the past is that you have we're very close friends with Rojan Taylor.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if, obviously, with the sad news of him passing recently, I was just wondering, Stephen Spalls last week, if you've not had a chance to listen to that, told us a couple of stories about him. I was just wondering if you had anything to share as regards to how he helped you in your work and such forth, because I think he's such a massive loss for snakebite worldwide, and especially snakebite in Africa as well. It's such a massive loss.
Definitely. I was initially, when I saw the news on Facebook the following morning, I was incredibly shocked. I didn't expect it. I met him when I was in Leiden last year for that snakebite conference. That was actually the first meeting I had with him. And we had a bit of communication regarding, how can we address the issue in Namibia? What can I learn from Kenya? How can we implement some of that stuff over here? And unfortunately, because of his passing now, we'll never have that opportunity. And certainly, I did follow his work quite a bit, and the stuff he did in Kenya was absolutely amazing. And it's something that I would like to achieve over here. I want to implement a lot of the work that he's done in Kenya, in Namibia, and it's such a major loss. I'm incredibly sad when I saw the news initially, but the only thing we can do on this continent is to continue his legacy. If we can all work together, we can definitely make his dream come true.
Definitely,
so I think that's the most important.
Definitely, and I think it's such a shame that, as you say, it all happened so sudden that you didn't get that information and that help from him to implement those ideas in Namibia. And I think that's such a shame, and I think everybody in the African continent will feel that pain with you and with us all, I think, as regards to that, because I think he would have been he was quite an influential person in that, but I think he could have been even more influential with all this new funding and everything that's coming through, and being involved with that. So we'll move the conversation on. I am very wary of time, because it's been 50 minutes already, and it does seem to absolutely fly by. So with your work going on into the future, where do you see your work moving on from where you are now over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, we've currently started a new project now, which is on the effects of translocation. Same old, everyone's doing it, but ours has a bit of a twist. So I'm looking at western barred spitting cobras, because they are the big problematic snake we have in Namibia. So our project is basically based on that, and we're trying to look into the effects on the local population. So what happens if I introduce a snake into the local populations of snakes on that property? And I'm going to look at whether snakes become more aggressive after translocation, and obviously whether they survive or die. But we're looking at a maximum sample size of 20 snakes, 10 translocated and 10 from a resident population. And that's that. Some of the other interesting projects we're working on currently it would be the one on snake venom and bacteria. When I was in Leiden, I attended a fairly nice talk on a similar project that was done. Ours has a bit of a twist. Recently, there was a kid that was bitten by a western barred spitting cobra, and apart from the nasty neurotoxic effects, he had a severe bacterial infection. And initially, when we took samples of the affected area of the child and we milked the snake, we picked up exactly the same bacteria in the venom as well. So that's something that we're looking at. So
it was in the venom, the bacteria.
It was in the venom, yes. It was in the venom. So is
that just one thing you've seen in that one particular cobra, or is that something you've seen across the species as a whole or within that region?
Well, this is the first time that I've picked this up, and certainly judging from the bites that we've treated in the past, we've never seen this stuff. Most of the time, with zebra snake bites, kids do tend to survive to a certain degree. Unfortunately, in this case, because of that severe bacterial infection the kid had, on top of the severe envenomation, unfortunately, the child passed away, which was incredibly sad for all of us working on it. So we're going to start to look at more zebra snake bites, obviously, and take some more samples and swabs. I'm going to start my project when the new snake season starts in August. So hopefully I'll have some cool results from that. And the other project we're currently working on is with one of the snakebite doctors, and we're looking at anti-venom and negricinta bites. We want to see whether there's something, if we missed something in the polyvalent that might be effective, and we're going to test a bunch of other anti-venoms as well to see whether there's any cross-reactivity. So that's all of the stuff we're working on, and again, this is done with our own funding.
So, because we are 55 minutes in, so if people want to get involved or to talk to you or anything on your work or help you with your work or whatever, how would they get in contact with you?
I think the easiest way to get in touch with me will be on our Facebook group called Snakes of Namibia. I frequently post on there, and all of my information is on there. Or they can just hit me up on Facebook, Francois Theart. That's it. That's the easiest way to get in touch with me.
Okay, that's we do ask people if they do want to get involved, do please extend a hand out to ourselves. Also, we can help put you in contact with people that you'd be interested in helping and such forth as well. So, with it being 56 minutes into the recording, do you have anything final that you'd like to say?
Well, just for everyone out there, if you can get involved locally with a conservation program or with snakebite, please do so. All of us really do need the help. And everyone listening to this podcast, and please support us. And once again, to you guys especially, thank you for having me. It's actually a real honor. It's a real honor for a 26-year-old from dusty Namibia to be on an international program. So I really appreciate it.
It's genuinely a pleasure, and hopefully somebody will listen that can help in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just by sharing the podcast, getting this more information out there, and helping the processing as a whole. And that kind of just brings me on to something else. That recently, we have, due to increasing costs and everything of the podcast, we have started a Patreon group. On the Patreon group, you can effectively give donations, join us on there for the podcast. That'll help us with getting more people on, because we do unfortunately sometimes have to make international phone calls, which cost me personally out of my own pocket again quite a considerable amount of money when I'm ringing Indonesia and such forth, due to rubbish internet signals and bits and pieces like that. So also on there, we will be bringing you some exclusive, if you become a member of our Patreon community, we'll be bringing you some exclusive content, some odd episodes, some more herping based videos from friends that are going to weird and wonderful countries all around the world looking for reptiles and some field guides and bits and pieces like that also that are going to be starting on that group also. So I'd just like to thank you once more, Francois, for coming on. Genuinely, it's been a pleasure, and it's great to hear the work you've done and the work that you've got coming up, and it's great to hear about some of the positive impacts that you've had and you're seeming to have, and the direction that it looks like you have quite a strong direction forward. You just need the helping hand to get it over the line, which is great. Seems like to me that it would be great if somebody could help you do that, and I think it could make a big difference in Namibia. So I'd just like again to thank everybody. Thank Danny for joining us as a new host, and we will be doing a host breakout episode very soon to find out a little bit more about Danny and Squirrel. So please do like, share, and join our Facebook, Instagram groups, our Patreon group, follow us on YouTube. We're on all the social media networks. So please do get involved in the community. And thank you very much, and speak to you all again soon.